All right.
Okay, here we are today. Another Coffee with the Founder. Got my coffee cup here, and also got a good friend and colleague here with me, Ali Michael. Ali, listen, we're trying to do these coffee talks just to get people familiar with the WPC family, the folks in the network, in the circle. We're doing these short little conversations so people can know about not only what you do at the conference, but what you do long after you leave the conference. So let's start with introduction. Like if I meet you or someone meets you at a bus stop, a train stop, or airport, and you introduce yourself, how do you introduce yourself? Who are you? What do you do? What's your work research? Who are we talking to here today?
Well, all right. So my name's Allie, and honestly, if you're sitting next to me on the airplane, I would tell you I'm a teacher educator. And then I have to find out how much you really want to know before I go into the whole thing. But I consider myself first a teacher educator, and my focus is on whiteness and helping white people understand their whiteness. And this comes, from my own desire to understand my own whiteness, what it means to be a white person, because I grew up in a place where we never talked about race, and we didn't talk about the fact that we're white, and we didn't talk about the history of that or how it's impacted our lives. So for me, I consider myself a teacher educator who helps teachers understand race, and specifically helps teachers understand whiteness. And when you think about the teachers in the US, that 85% of the teachers are white. And so even though I think whiteness impacts everybody, whether you're white or not, it's particularly important to me to support those folks who are white to understand what that means. So I run a small organization called the Race Institute for K-12 Educators. And we have two goals. One is to make the research on race and education more accessible to teachers, because so often the research on race or on education is really tucked away in academic journals, and it's not useful to people who are in classrooms. And so I think we actually know a lot about creating equitable schools, and often the people who need that research don't have access to it. So that's one thing we try to do. The other thing we do is create a space for educators to do their own in-depth personal work on their own racial identities, because we believe that an educator can't support a student to have a positive racial identity unless they themselves have a positive racial identity. And most educators don't even know they have a racial identity, much less one that's conscious and aware and positive and proactive in terms of working against racism. So we offer 3-day workshops that give teachers an opportunity to really do the deep work of looking at themselves. And then otherwise, I work in schools, try to write books or articles that are gonna be accessible. Again, I don't think, teachers are capable of deep intellectual thought. It's not that they can't read things that are difficult. It's just that so much academic stuff is not only difficult, it's totally kind of useless to the average educator, because it's not written with application in mind. Yeah. And so that I try to make all the work that I am a part of be something that a teacher could pick up and use, like the book that you and I edited together with Marguerite, The Guide for White Women Who Teach Black Boys. The goal of that book was to create chapters that teachers could read over their lunch period and that would be useful to them, and then they could take it back and make change in the course of their day. So all of what I just said to you is not really what I would say to the person at the bus stop, but that's a little bit about who I am.
Yeah, well, we are talking to the willing and the open to the conversation folks, not the resistance. So I think that's really helpful, because you mentioned a lot of stuff, and I want to go back and ask you some of those things in a little bit more detail. For example, did you grow up wanting to be a teacher educator? Are you doing the job you wish you would be doing when you were growing up?
Not sure what I thought I would do when I was growing up. I think I thought I might be a politician, honestly. And I also thought that I might be a teacher. I wanted to do some, I wanted to have an impact on the world. But that kind of evolved over time. But there was a time when I was living in South Africa with a Black family, a Black South African family who are good friends of mine. And I was doing a lot of mediation for them with their children who were in an international school, and just recognizing how hard it was for them as a South African family and also a Black family to be navigating this predominantly white international private school space. And it was that moment when I was working with those teachers that I thought, maybe I don't want to be a teacher. I want to help teachers like these teachers be more receptive to families like this Gwentu family that I was living with. And I want to, and it has to start with them understanding themselves and understanding all the walls that they have up. And so I remember I was like 24 or 25, and I remember thinking, that's what I want to study, race and education. And that's when it started to click for me. And then when I started that path, I remember thinking, and no, it's not race I want to study, it's whiteness. Because race, every time I went to a class on race, it was about people of color. And I just kept thinking, like, we're missing something. And part of it was my education in South Africa, but white people have everything to do with racism. And so if we're not talking about white people, we're missing a huge part of this equation. And so I kept kind of refining it, like, well, I want to study race and education. Then I'd do that for a little bit, and then I'd realize this isn't it. It has to be whiteness. And when I applied for my another graduate program, people said, don't tell them you want to study whiteness, because first of all, that was done in the 90s. And second of all, nobody does that. And so they're not going to let you into their program. And I said, this is what I want to study. So I don't want to lie to people, because I don't want to show up and surprise them and then they're not going to let me study it. And so the one program that I got into said, look, you can come here and study whiteness, but we don't know anything about it. So you're going to have to figure out how to learn it, but you can study it. We just can't teach it to you. But for me, it continued to go back to understanding myself and helping other people like me understand themselves, with the recognition that, like, we're not going to solve racial equity issues in schools by just understanding Black kids, by just understanding kids of color. That's an important part of it, but I believe it's like an over scrutinized part. And that white people, just like so many white people, continue to think we don't even have a race, that we don't even identify with the term white. We don't even see how it's shaped our lives. And I'm familiar with that, because that's how I spent the first 18 years of my life.
Yeah. So if you're talking to a group of willing educators, but uninformed educators about whiteness, how do you define that for people when they have no clue what whiteness is?
Yeah. Well, I usually invite people to to start by thinking about what's hard about talking about whiteness, and to invite people into that just starting to use that term. Like, what's hard about talking about it? Part of what's hard about talking about it is that people don't want to get it wrong. Part of it is that they are just not used to using that term. Part of it is that it makes them feel guilty. Just using the term whiteness makes them feel guilty. And then I'll usually ask people what it means to be white. And what's so interesting about this is that people know what it means to be white. And the definitions that we come up with are all about, like, the social meanings. Like, it means not having to be afraid when I'm in an interaction with a police officer. And that's true for a lot of cisgender heterosexual white people. I think the more, for gay and lesbian white people, it's a little bit less true than for heterosexual white people. I think for trans white people, it's a little bit less true. But it's true for a lot of white people. It means, knowing about my ancestry. It means having teachers and role models that look like me. So people will list all of these things. What does whiteness look like? It looks like all of these things. And what's amazing is nobody ever mentions being European descended or having pinkish skin, because whiteness really isn't about the kind of phenotype or the ancestry. It's about what people assume about you when they look at you, and then all the social things you get as a result of that. And so then I usually give them the definition from, there's two definitions I really like. I don't know if I'll be able to remember them. One is from Paul Kivel, who basically says whiteness is a constantly shifting boundary that separates those who are entitled to protection and those whose vulnerability to violence is justified by their not being white. So who is white and who is not white is constantly changing. We know, after World War II, all these European ethnic groups that before World War II were not considered white were suddenly considered white and allowed to live in the white suburbs in the US. And so Italians, not previously considered white, were suddenly white. Irish, not previously considered white, were suddenly white. And that whiteness was protection. And so that's Paul Kivel's definition. Then Ruth Frankenberg is a sociologist who wrote about whiteness, who said, whiteness is three things, essentially. It's a way of understanding ourselves and others. So, and it's invisible. So I can judge myself and judge you based on an expectation of whiteness that you could never meet because you're not white, and that I will always meet because I am white, and yet it's invisible to me. So it's a way of understanding myself and others. It's a lens for interpreting the world around me. But for most white people, it's invisible. And so it's really insidious in that way, because we're not all white. We can't all be white, and we can't all have the history that white people in this country have had. And then she says it's also basically like a set of cultural norms that are also unnamed and unrecognized as white. And so we have these ways of doing things that we think of as being professional, or being just like, this is how school is done. This is what professionals do. This is how a professional talks. And we don't say that those norms are coded by whiteness. So it's like white cultural behaviors that get seen as what is standard and normal and professional, and therefore more valuable, and other things as well. And I think that can get confusing, because it doesn't mean if you wear a suit you're acting white, or if you talk a certain way you're acting white. But it's also really important to recognize that we have these invisible expectations based on whiteness that we impose on everybody.
Yeah. It's big. It's a lot, and I'm often wondering how we'll continue to get this into the hands of general population of people. Not the most resistant. I'm saying that people that want to do better, want to learn more, so on and so forth. So that's really helpful. Now, what about white supremacy, whiteness, white privilege, whiteness? Are those things synonymous? How do you kind of distinguish between those three, or are they all the same thing?
That's a good question. I think they're all connected. And I think the thing I want to say about all of these terms is that they are commonly used enough that people have strong feelings about them. And I feel like if you don't like these terms, don't get stuck on the term. Just keep trying to learn. Because to be honest, I didn't learn the term white privilege until I was in graduate school. And so my first grad program, I didn't even learn it in my grad program. I was on summer vacation, and my sister was in another grad program as a teacher. And she said, Allie, and at that point we'd been doing a lot of learning together about racism. And she said, Allie, you got to read this article by Peggy McIntosh. And she handed me this photocopied article because this was like, it wasn't common to send around PDFs. And she said, this is what white people get because of racism. And at that point in my life, I knew so much about racism and how people of color are impacted by racism. It just clicked. Like, of course, there's something we get because we don't have to deal with racism. And the term that Peggy McIntosh uses is privilege. But I think that for a lot of people, they hear about privilege before they really understand how racism works. And so then they hear it and they think, well, I don't have privilege. They think it means that they have class privilege, or that somehow their life is easy. And so therefore they reject it. Instead of what I think Peggy McIntosh really means, and what WPC means by the word privilege, which is that it's really the opposite. It's like it's the opposite side of the coin of oppression. People deal with oppression, and so other people get privilege from not having to deal with that oppression. Those two things are connected. So whenever people say they're grateful for their privilege, for example, I try to remind them, I need to practice gratitude. I need to be grateful for what I have in my life. But you can't be grateful for privilege, because you can't have privilege without oppression. And so we have to, and the problem is not the people with privilege. The problem, well, I don't know if that's exactly accurate, but the problem is the fact that we divided ourselves in this way, and that we should be fighting the division. We should be fighting the thing that causes the oppression and the privilege. So anyway, the way I understand privilege is that, for me, it gave me a term for all of the things that I experience as a result of oppression. And I think Peggy McIntosh says, there are some privileges nobody should have. And there are some privileges everybody should have. So not all privilege is the same. Not all privilege is necessarily bad, but the privileges that everybody should have, we need to figure out how to expand. And then there's privileges nobody should have, like the privilege to feel like my voice is more important than everybody else's, or the privilege to take up more space. That nobody should have that. But the privilege to feel safe in my community and to feel like I can trust officers of the law, that's a privilege everybody should have. And so I think privilege refers to a lot of the daily experiences of being white in a white supremacist society. And I think white supremacy is more of a kind of systemic explanation of the ways that all of our institutions reinforce racial privilege for white people. And that's something, again, some people get tripped up on the term white supremacy because they picture members of the KKK and really overt, intentional, violent racism. And that is one way that white supremacy is defined. But I think the way we use it at WPC and the way that I use it that is actually really helpful to me is recognizing that we live in a country that was founded on really protecting the rights of white people and only really respecting the cultural values of white people. So even in terms of the way that we protected land, for example, in the US, like we respected the land claims of European people over Native people who thought about land differently. So we even the way we structured our country was about the European descended notions of culture and relationship to land and to money. And then, we live in a country where at the time of our Constitution, the time it was created, white people were whole people and Black people were 3/5 of a person. So and that happened like that. It was part of almost every institution in this country, that white people would be whole and that people of color would be less than whole. And we actually stipulated how Black people would be 3/5 of a person. And we never fixed that. So all of these institutions that were founded on this assumption that only white people be whole, continue to grow and evolve, but with that same founding premise. And so for me, that's white supremacy. That's like the way it all fits together systemically.
Yeah, that's not only good in definition, but also in visual, which it really helps when you do the kind of work you do, which is practical application, gives people hopefully some ways that they can understand the definition, but also hopefully, at least for me, I see visually a way that I can explain that, understand that, and apply that. But a lot of that was historically assigned, historically overviewed or looked at, which is helpful. But I think we have right now a current day case study in COVID-19. So I'm wondering, because I feel like there's only a few people I can ask this of and really feel that there's some understanding of this question and some answers coming back. And that is, what does white supremacy, white privilege look like, feel like in COVID-19? A real national case study where we've almost been paused as a nation to really take a look at how we do business as it relates to a pandemic. And what has COVID-19 shown you in reference to our nation, white supremacy, white privilege, and possibly the messages to white people, the privilege over those who have been oppressed? What's your sense of the messaging during this time?
Yeah. There's so many layers. I got a text this morning from South Africa. It's just a long piece from my friends about how in South Africa and Zimbabwe and Botswana and other parts of Southern Africa, people are refusing to lock down because the very poor are they're in a fight against hunger. And if they lock down, they will not have enough to eat. And the people with money are trying to get everybody else to lock down because they're afraid of the virus. Because we can lock down and we can stay home for a few months and we're going to survive that. And we're afraid of the virus. But it basically said, like, people are afraid of two different things. The very poor are afraid of hunger, while the wealthy are afraid of the virus. And because we don't take care of one another, we can't come together. If we were able to provide food for the very poor who can't stay home, then there would be less threat of the virus spreading. But we don't see, what COVID-19 says to all of us is, you are interconnected. You are interconnected. You are interdependent. We don't care. I don't care. COVID-19 doesn't care about the lines we've drawn about nationalism or about who has healthcare, who doesn't. COVID-19 it can affect everybody, and so that's one thing. And at the same time as I say that, it's this ridiculous thing to say, because it's going to obviously affect us all differently. If you don't have health insurance, you're gonna have many fewer options. I heard a story about a Mexican migrant worker in New Jersey who developed COVID-19, and he felt like he had to tell his landlady because he didn't want to infect her because she was pregnant. And so he did, and so she kicked him out of his housing. So then suddenly he was living in a car with COVID-19, really suffering. He didn't want to go anywhere to get food or water because he didn't want to spread it, because he said, basically, this is so painful. This hurts my body so much. I don't want anybody else to have to deal with this. So here's this man hiding out from society because of his own integrity. And yet nobody's reaching out to take care of him. And in this particular story, somebody was able to find him housing to ride out the sickness. But I feel like what COVID-19 is saying is that we need to wake up to our interdependency and to our interconnectedness. And I mean, you know, as far as I understand, the people who are still working, the nurses are predominantly women of color. Many of the people who are delivering food and working in grocery stores are predominantly people of color. And, you know, it's like we have this, I mean, it's not different from before. The thing is, like, right now, all the inadequacies of our society are being exposed, but it's not different. I can remember before COVID-19 when I was traveling a lot for work and just thinking, you know, God, every time I get on a plane, almost all these people are white, and almost all the people running this airport are people of color.
Yeah.
So it continues to be that we have this kind of a whole group of people who are in a serving position, and this whole other group of people that's predominantly white who are being served. And it doesn't always break down along race lines. And I mean, right now we have people of every racial background who in the medical profession who are risking their lives to save us. We have people who are predominantly people of color who are on operating our public transit systems, who are being exposed every day to this virus, and many are getting sick and many are dying. And so, I mean, I don't feel like this is new to anybody. But I feel like the one lesson that we're supposed to be getting from this is that we can't that none of us operates in a vacuum. None of us can operate without one another. And that some of the work that we have traditionally underpaid, including nursing, but also people, you know, jobs in grocery stores, just the hourly wage work, is incredibly valuable to our functioning as a society. Yeah. The other thing is that we're all scared. Everybody's scared. And so people do what makes them feel powerful, and blaming other people is part of what makes people feel powerful. And, you know, the whole idea that the Chinese created this virus is totally ridiculous. And it's amazing. Like, our racism has operated on so many levels, because at first there was this virus in Wuhan, and none of us cared, because we thought, oh, well, that's sad that they have the virus, but we don't have it. We didn't see it as something that could come for us. And then when it did, we continued, you know, as a country, and at least our leadership continued to blame China and to blame the Chinese, which then makes us afraid of the wrong thing, because it's not Chinese people who are carrying this. It's not Chinese food that's carrying this. It's human beings. It's like blaming gay people for AIDS. It's just, you're blaming the wrong thing. And so therefore the virus continued to spread, because we were using racism to spread blame rather than looking at the science and how it actually operates in the human body. Yeah. There's so much more to say. I'd love to hear your thoughts. There's so much more to say.
Yeah, well, I mean, you hit on something. What I'm wondering is, as we finally, due to some scholars out there, people of color scholars, pushing and pressing for the statistics on how COVID-19 is impacting different communities, i.e. often the most oppressed people of color communities, in these inequitable, these glaring kinds of disparities. I think it says something to us. I mean, what the state of our healthcare, all that kind of stuff, access. And then you mentioned also, you know, China or Asian Pacific Islanders, because I think even when you say China in America, that can often mean all Asian Pacific Islanders, because often folks don't have, you know, those kinds of experiences that can delineate between Taiwan or, you know, China or Korea, so on and so forth. It's like a big blanket. And so, again, that's another group that gets oppressed, so to speak. And of course, the leadership giving direction around where we're going as a country, often the mouthpieces that are visible in reference to, the CEOs. And I mean, it just continues to follow the same pattern of whiteness and white people. And I'm just wondering, as a person of color, it just hurts me inside to see that. When I see these numbers, it just pains me. It doesn't uplift me, it brings me down. And I'm wondering, what's it like to be white during this time? Because I don't think there's no real reporting around what's happening to our kids, our young folks who are watching this, witnessing this, hearing this, and the possible messages we're giving to them that could be similarly connected to what you talked about historically, when people were doing some of the most devastating things around oppression and using all kinds of things like religion and science to justify why white was better. And I'm wondering, are we seeing a repeat of that? What's the message that we're sending during COVID-19 as it relates to white supremacy, whiteness? Because I don't feel like we're having enough information, having enough conversation about that. If we're talking about it, it's usually what's happening to the most oppressed.
Right. We're talking about people of color again.
Yes, exactly. So that's kind of where I'm at. And then, I think about, social distancing. I realized this, we were walking around the neighborhood here and where we live in Green Bay, which is essentially the suburbs. And I just feel like the suburbs have been designed in a social distance model, that actually we're strengthening the habits of distancing ourselves from other. And I'm wondering what this time of quarantine is going to do to people who essentially live in isolation anyway. And so those are some of the things I've been thinking about and wondering, will we emerge from quarantine differently, or will we emerge strengthening status quo? And so I think for those of us who are on board, who are willing to have these conversations, who have young people in our lives, these are the kind of things that I've been asking and wondering about for myself, our household, as well as with friends and colleagues.
It's a good question. I mean, and what I was saying before about how we're all in the same boat is just, I keep saying that, and then I keep saying, that's such a stupid thing to say. It's not untrue. We're all affected by this, and the more we recognize our interconnectedness, the better we'll be able to handle it. But it's false in that we just, like, I am not in the same boat as somebody who doesn't have safe housing. I'm not in the same boat as somebody who can't afford food, or somebody who has to be working right now. It's not the same boat. It's totally different. Because, when we look historically at whiteness, we had all these white people building a country for themselves, and just not really, I think most of the white people were just not thinking about people of color or about inequality. I think that like when I think about the civil rights movement, I always think, there were white people who were standing up and saying something, but most white people, and then there were, all these atrocities committed by white people, but most white people were bystanders. That's mostly what white people have done historically, is be bystanders, sometimes conscious, sometimes unconscious, to all of the racial violence and inequity. And I feel like that is what it's like to be white right now. For me, I am a bystander to it. So like I can read and hear about what's happening to people of color. I can see the ways that like these decisions are made predominantly by white people or like in the case of South Africa, they're being made by Black people, but they're being made by the wealthy, powerful people who are not afraid of hunger. And that I'm able to even enjoy quarantine. I'm able to say, like, I mean, I even think about it. This is a small example, but when I see my neighbors who are Black who are wearing face masks, and we don't wear face masks when we walk around the neighborhood because we don't have them. But I guess we could figure something out. But I thought maybe that's even a form of privilege, because maybe people are afraid that the governor said you're supposed to wear face masks, and here we just kind of flaunt that law because we don't have them or we don't want to wear them or something. Yeah. And I was just thinking, like, I don't know. I think being white right now is about being able to think about yourself and think about your own needs and think about your own anxiety. That's what I'm doing. Think about your own health and not think about the bigger picture. And like, I think that's the privilege of being white right now. And we still have health insurance. My partner still has his job. And that's not true for all white people, but you know, I think that's part of it too, is that if you started this whole thing with a more financial privilege, then you're weathering it differently. And we know historically white people have access to more of a financial base because of the inherited wealth or the absence of inherited debt.
Yeah. And, you know, I don't know what all the answers are. All I know is we're not hearing that side of the story, that we're often hearing what's happening to people of color, the most oppressed, and the devastating numbers, which is important to know, because I'm glad people are pushing on that side of the question, because we need to know how this pandemic is causing death in ways that are just inequitable, particularly as it relates to people of color. But what we're not hearing is what's that like to watch that as white people? What's it like to, what the impact of those numbers are having when you see the reports of that? And what's it like in your communities or in your household when, I mean, literally you could spend isolation in Disney World. I mean, from Disney Plus to ice cream cones, whatever. I mean,
and all the things that make you not depressed.
Yeah, I only say that because I think what's been additionally unique about this time than if this would have happened in 1960 is the number of people of color who can now live in Disney World, the suburbs, i.e., during the pandemic, myself included, that I could find myself walking around a space and place thinking, oh, this is not too bad. Well, I can't go to the mall. You know, I can't go out to eat at my favorite restaurant. I can't get on a plane for my vacation, right? I'm thinking to myself, holy shizzle. Like, I have no sense of what struggle is like, which is so far away from where and how I grew up. And I think that's some of what's happening to me when I'm watching these disparities play out. But again, I feel like that's partly because of my connection to people of color and understanding of that. And I'm willing to explore and discuss that, but I'm still finding myself asking, I'm wondering how white people are processing these numbers. Like you said, if there's a oppress, then there must be a privilege.
Right. If there's an under-resourced, there's an over-resourced. Yeah, it's real. It's real. And I think it's a good question. You know, it's funny because I feel like what I understand about whiteness is that I'm taught to see it as like just invisible. And I think what you always help me to do is to see it. But I'm curious about the other ways that you project that it feels that it is to be white right now, because I feel like there's also stuff I'm missing. You know, anyway, I just wonder if there's more to say about what you see, what you imagine.
Yeah, I'm just asking those questions as I, you know, again, think about internet. I mean, think about little things. You know, we always want our kids to be grateful for the little things, which is so
Right.
critical today, right? The fact that we have a meal, that we're probably throwing away more food than people need on the streets of New York or so on and so forth. And so I think that that to me becomes even more glaring during this time. And I think, again, I feel like part of that is because of my connection to my life of being in struggle, being a part of that oppressed class, and somewhat working my way up to now in these suburban lives that we're living. And so what I'm doing now is processing that as a Black man with privilege, with access. Um, and I think that's, again, partly connected because I've had that other life as a part of my life. But I'm wondering if you've never had struggle in your life, where I'm reading people going to islands, to, wait out the quarantine, or, being in New York and knowing that people are living in homes worth $10 million dollars or apartments worth $10 million dollars, and probably having people deliver their groceries. No words. I mean, life hasn't stopped at all, except maybe they can't go places. And I'm wondering, is this time impacting white people, the privilege, whiteness, white supremacy differently? And what's that impact? My inclination is yes, but I don't think we're having enough conversations, if any, about the impact of privilege, white supremacy, COVID-19 on white people.
What's interesting is I feel like part of what racism does to white people and segregation does is that it makes it like shortens the scale of what's possible in our lives. So what we think is bad is, it's like the whole idea of first world problems. So we think it's bad, but like but everybody, and I think people say this, like so many people I know that it could be so much worse, but like being at home and missing our lives and not being able to um, go out and having groceries delivered feels really bad. It feels sad. It feels scary. I mean, I think my panic at the beginning was about the virus, even though I'll probably be fine if I get it, and most people I know would be. Then my panic was about social unrest and the possibility that just like people are gonna just like start freaking out on each other, particularly white supremacists, which in fact they are doing in different parts of the country. Um, but I feel like I have this narrow window, and I'm like, oh, this is bad. But I don't. I know. I'm conscious that it could be that there's like this whole other way it could be that actually would be bad. That this, like you said, is Disneyland. We get to just be with our little family and be safe and have enough to eat. And the biggest problem is trying to figure out how to keep people from being bored. But I feel like that's always been the way. Like when a white person, and white people have a whole range of economic realities. But like when I feel broke or I feel like I'm struggling with money, I don't have any idea, really, like, because my siblings don't rely on me for money. My parents don't rely on me for money. Um, my partner has an inheritance from his own side of the family. So I don't have any idea really what financial hardship is. And I have to keep putting that in perspective, because financial hardship is when you don't have money and you got a lot of people counting on you, and there's no money coming from anywhere else. But I feel like that's kind of like the same thing with coronavirus. It's like we have this narrow sense of what's even possible, and so then we think it's bad when actually, it's we're living the dream.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, appreciate being able to have this dialogue with you because it's, again, an opportunity to explore some aspects of what we're experiencing right now that is much broader and not just looking at the oppressed, but looking at the super privileged, the whiteness, the white supremacy as well involved in all of this. I wish we had another half hour to keep going, but I do appreciate you giving me some additional things to chew on and being willing to grapple with this tough subject matter, because it's possible we could be here another 6 months. And I don't know what that means. I just think I hope that we, in addition to looking at the disparities, the bottom half of the disparities, we look at the top half of the disparities.
Yeah.
So we want to end in a fun way, though. Well, two things. One, what do you got cooking? What's on the alley horizon over the next 10 years? Anything you got in the hopper that you want to share in reference to the future of your work?
Well, to be totally honest, I feel like I'm in a little bit of a period of discernment because I really don't know where the world is going. I don't know what we're doing. I don't, I feel like anything I write right now, I just wonder, is it even relevant? Because what will people want to know? Do they want to hear about coronavirus 2 years from now? Probably not. But what will people need to hear? And I really feel like my spirituality impacts my anti-racism work, that it comes from a deep sense of how interconnected we all are as human beings. And I wonder if that might play a role in my work in the future. Right now, in terms of what I'm doing, is we're writing, and you and I are co-editing with a whole team of amazing people, the sibling edition of the Guide for White Women Who Teach Black Boys, which is called Teaching Brilliant and Beautiful Black Girls. And I am in the process of trying to write up some research I've been doing with preschool teachers and how they talk about race with the kids that they teach. And I've been wanted for a long time to write a book for white people about how to help other white people take the next step. And so I've been kind of working on that. I feel like, white people learn at places like WPC and from people like Robin DiAngelo, the really important message that we have to stand up against racism. And then when we come up against racism, what we do is we have this calculus where we say, like, how do I make sure that I did not collude? And we're so busy trying to get that point of not collusion for ourselves that I think we intervene with other white people in a way that shames them or undercuts them or pushes them further away from the possibility of anti-racism. And that when we're at that choice point, instead of saying, how do I make sure I don't collude, we should be asking, how can I intervene with this white person standing in front of me so that they can take their next step, so that there will be more white people working against racism? Because ultimately, it's not about me winning, getting the point, proving that I took my anti-racist step, regardless of the outcome. It's about looking at the white people around me, knowing they're not that different from who I am now or who I was at some point, and helping them take their next steps so that we have more white people on the path working against racism. I feel like this is a kind of strategic thinking that people of color have used forever. They don't just cut white people down. They don't just shame people. They don't just, yell at them for being racist. The people of color are very strategic about minimizing racism by intervening the way that is often needed. And I feel like white people don't know how to be strategic. We don't. We just want to make sure we don't look bad, which is very individualistic and comes also from white supremacy. So that's what I want to do. I want to write a book or write an article or do something that's going to help white people better understand how to intervene with each other so that we can not be pushing white people towards the white supremacist self-love movement, which a lot of people are going towards because they feel like they can't be fully themselves in an anti-racist movement. I think white people can be. But Eddie, I just want to say I always appreciate talking with you. I appreciate working with you in any capacity, because I learn so much from the way that you push people to think differently. Not even to think differently. You are pushing me to think the way I have chosen to spend my life thinking, and still sometimes can't get there. And that's like the big detriment of whiteness, is that it really shapes our lenses. So we're seeing everything through a lens of whiteness, to the extent that sometimes we can't even see that we're seeing it that way. And so I just appreciate you and your questions, and helping me think differently about the current moment, or think the way I want to be thinking about the current moment, but sometimes can't get there. And I really appreciate you for bringing us all together through these interviews, because it's really valuable work, and you're so good at it. So thanks.
Well, I appreciate that, Allie. We're going to end in a fun way. We're collecting, what are you watching? Is there anything you're watching that's teaching you something, or anything that just kind of takes y'all away or takes you away? We're collecting a list of streaming suggestions for folks. Is there anything you've seen lately that you like, that taught you something, or something that just lets you escape?
Yeah. So we are watching, well, first of all, my daughter's watching a lot of Simpsons, which I don't love, but I really appreciate the jokes that come out of it, that she brings to the family, and then we can all kind of joke and joke and joke. And there's a whole lot to say about whiteness there, and sexism. But the thing that we have loved is Bollywood movies, because my daughter's reading this book called Arusha and the End of Time, and she asked, like, what's a Bollywood movie? So we watched this Bollywood movie on Netflix called Lagan, which is about a group of villagers in India who challenge the British colonialists to a game of cricket so that they can waive their tax, their Lagan. And it is a 4-hour movie. And we did not even feel the time passing. It was so fun to watch. There's lots of dancing. The plot is riveting. And then we liked it so much, we found another film called Dangal, which is about a father in a rural village in India who has the dream of being a national champion in wrestling, but he can't do it because it doesn't make money. So he raises his daughters to be world champion wrestlers. And again, 4-hour movie, great music, and my kids are so into it. So now what we're realizing is that Amir Khan Productions is full of really family-friendly Bollywood movies that are riveting and like really long. So it can be a movie you watch for days. And I have a 6-year-old. We have to read the subtitles to him, but we're all loving it. It's such good film. So anyway, that's what I really recommend. And that's kind of we spend a lot of time. We've watched this 4-hour movie Lagan twice now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, hey, that added some international flavor to our list, so thank you for that. And we'll definitely be sure to post that on our list. But Allie, listen, as long as you will be a part of the WPC family, we'll have you. It's good to see you. I look forward to seeing you face to face, so I can give you a real hug. In the meantime, I'll give you a Wakanda virtual hug, saying thank you, sister. I appreciate you. Sending you and the family much love.
Thank you, Eddie. You too.
All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.